Let me get out of the way first. So, America bombed Iran. Even though this conflict is highly difficult to predict in the days and weeks to come due to how fast it has been proven to change, I'll try my best to make this scenario as realistic as possible and release it before the events are countered by a news story that will probably come out a day after I finish this script. Before we get into the specifics, here's my opinion so you can see my biases and adjust your view of this video accordingly. I was already thinking of making a USA versus Russia video, as requested by AOldM11, and the Iran situation seemed to be an interesting kicking off point. Let's cover the best and worst possibilities first. The best possibility, in regard to human lives, is Iran surrendering to Israel, and to get the US off their backs, giving up their nuclear program. I don't think this is likely, as Iran has already said it will not surrender. The worst possibility is the US invades Iran, or Iran does have nuclear missiles and fires them at the US. The US, thinking it's Russia and China, would launch nukes at them, and bam, nuclear Armageddon. I think and hope that this won't happen. So, something in between. Israel and Iran continue attacking each other, and eventually an unofficial ceasefire is reached. For this scenario, we're going to have to do something different though. We need this conflict to end quickly. Mainly because I started planning for this video before the whole situation and didn't want to redo anything. So the US threatens an invasion of Iran unless they surrender, and allow the UN to investigate their illegal nuclear program, which they reluctantly do by October.
Marie, is that my minerals?
Now we need the US to somehow switch to have an international focus entirely on Russia within the next decade. For this, Trump is our guy. He's by far the most unpredictable president, and we can use this to our advantage. His strategy is causing a new, different scandal every few weeks or months, so it'll be difficult to keep people distracted on one overarching agenda. However, with a new focus on Russia, nationalism may be ignited as it was during the Cold War. With NATO just agreeing to raise its defense spending target to 5% by 2035 per Trump's request, and the UK starting to send missiles to Ukraine, we have a real chance for a united offensive against Russia. In December 2025, to complete Project 2025 with a big finale, Trump announces support for Ukraine and not only sends more arms but troops. The nations in Europe most worried about Russia, Poland and the Baltics, send troops as well, although in small numbers as they need to protect their borders in case of an invasion. By February of 2026, the UK, Germany, and France send troops. The main leaders of the alliance in Europe doing this causes a landslide of other countries too, and by the end of the month, all of NATO is involved. Putin is completely startled by this sudden militarization and sends more to the front lines, but with the cost of the Russian economy looming overhead, not much can be done. Although the previous few months were largely successful for the Russians, the sheer amount of modern arms and well-trained troops flowing in are stopping the offensive in its tracks. Meanwhile, after years of preparation, China is ready to take back Taiwan. Stage 1 of their plan begins in August 2027, the 100th anniversary of the People's Liberation Army. They completely surround Taiwan and don't allow supplies to pass a blockade. This doesn't only weaken the country's economy but its people's morale, making the possibility of surrender and assimilation easier. The US, entirely focused on the war in Ukraine, had majorly extracted its forces and influence on the island in the year prior. With the onset of the blockade, begins evacuating the final forces. China, not wishing a conflict with the US, allows the fleet to retreat. As the blockade continues, China bombards Taiwan with missiles, severely damaging the island's defenses. Even with Japanese and South Korean aid, the blockade does not falter. After 8 months of Stage 1, Stage 2 begins, aka full-on invasion. The Chinese fleet surrounds and captures the Penghu Islands, preventing multiple angles Taiwan could defend from. Next, invasion lands in the north and the center of the west coast. The landing ships have to stop a mile out from the shore where the water becomes waist deep, ensuring heavy casualties for the invaders, but they manage to make it past the beaches. The Central Division moves south to capture Tainan and Kaohsiung, while the Northern Division moves north to capture the capital of Taipei. Civilian boats transfer supplies to Chinese forces on the island, and more military ships transport reinforcements. The three cities listed above are captured, and the Northern and Central Divisions move to capture the center of the west coast, where the city of Taichung lies. This, along with a tertiary major invasion, captures Taichung. Forces move along the coast and surround the mountainous inland region of the country. The inland terrain is difficult to counter, but after 8 months, all fighting forces on the island are destroyed. But the struggle isn't over yet for China. Now they have to integrate an unwilling Taiwan back into Chinese society. After being the second president to secure a non-consecutive term, Trump's biggest challenge is to sustain control of the nation when the 22nd Amendment outlaws him from being elected president or vice president for a third term. Instead of running for president again, Trump shows support for Vance's administration and runs for the position of a New York representative in the House. He also supports the election of Donald Trump Jr. as president pro tempore of the Senate, aka the third in the line of succession from the president. Both Trump and his son are elected. As the largest party in the House, the GOP are allowed to choose the Speaker of the House, and they of course choose Trump. With the Democrats still unorganized and unable to find a clear leader, Vance narrowly wins the 2028 presidential elections. Only hours after Vance is inaugurated on January 20th, 2029, both he and the vice president resign. As the line of succession goes, the Speaker of the House and the President pro tempore are elected to President and Vice President respectively, with them being Trump and his son. Trump promises Vance this is only temporary, and Vance was forced to go along with his plan, otherwise his ousting by Trump from MAGA would effectively end his political career. As the Democrats finally learn from the mistakes and start getting their party together, they are able to gain enough support to win back both the House and the Senate in the 2030 midterms. If nothing drastic is done soon, it's looking like they'll win back the presidency in 2032. As November approaches and Vance runs again for presidency, in one sudden blow, ICE imprisons and deports Democratic senators and representatives. In their absence, Trump is able to do anything he wants in the form of massive changes to the Constitution for the remaining Republican officials. He allows the president to elect Supreme Court justices on a whim, basically filling the court with his supporters and making his crimes against the democratic process unable to be legally challenged. He makes it so negative speech against him or his administration can be charged as a felony, puts many restrictions on those running against him. Finally, he makes it so only the legislative branch can vote for president, making it so he and his son are elected to the presidency for a fourth term. This still allows there to be some of a democratic process while still ensuring he will be elected no matter what. By January of 2030, Ukraine's pre-2020 borders are reinstated after a successful offensive in the north, which even gains more land in Kursk, followed by the capture of the city of Donetsk, causing the four annexed oblasts to be liberated in the south. Russian forces are unable to re-enter the country. Later in the same month, the incumbent pro-Russian president and dictator of Belarus, Alexander Lukashenko, dies from complications of old age, providing for a perfect vacuum for a revolution, especially with the liberation of Ukraine severely weakening Russia. Although Lukashenko's son does run for president and wins the sham elections, the exiled opposition leader of Serhiy Tsikhanouski returns. Thousands of protesters seize the House of Government in the capital of Minsk, and the majority of the populace recognize Tsikhanouski as their true leader. However, there are still many pro-Lukashenko civilians and soldiers in the country ready to fight for their cause. Russia immediately sends support to the pro-Lukashenko forces, and the civil war begins, with the democratic forces focused in the west, with the capital being Minsk, and the pro-Lukashenko forces in the east, with the capital being Mahilia. NATO and Ukraine respond in accordance. Kaliningrad Oblast is cut off from Russia for months, as they are completely surrounded by NATO and democratic Belarusian forces. In May 2030, a bloodless coup overthrows the Russian government seated there, and total autonomy is close in sight for the nation, with their only roadblock being a lenient NATO occupation. Back in Belarus, a NATO offensive in the south, helped by its proximity to Ukraine, helps it capture the city of Gomel. There are no more major non-west to east offensives, as NATO forces focus on simply moving the front line eastward. Eventually, Mahilia is in sight of capture by the west, and one last desperate Russian offensive breaks through NATO lines, but is eventually destroyed. The city is surrounded, and the east capital is taken. From then on, Vitebsk, the last stronghold of Lukashenko supporters, is captured, and Russia reluctantly recognizes defeat. By January of 2033, the Republic of Belarus becomes democratic. In February 2034, Ukraine and NATO forces invade Crimea, and despite strong Russian resistance, are able to seize the peninsula by April. With Russia severely weakened and unable to attempt recapture of its whole territories in its current state, Ukraine, Belarus, and Kaliningrad are allowed to join NATO, as there is no fear of a Russian attack. With referendums resulting in the Russian-supported Georgian separatist territories of South Ossetia and Abkhazia joining the Russian Federation, Russia officially retreats from outside expansion. The Russian threat to Europe is basically over. With so many restrictions on the democratic process in place, Republicans control all three branches, and Trump is re-elected along with his son in 2036. His promise to Vance was a lie, but Vance is smart enough to not speak up about it, and is elected as a senator of Ohio in the 2038 midterms. On the other side of the planet, China continues the annexation of its claimed regions. With 8 years of assimilation and militarization in Taiwan, China has a significant kicking off point for a major offensive into the South China Sea. They seek to take control of the area inside the 9-dash line, their unrecognized claim in the region. To achieve this claim, they must seize territory from the Philippines, Malaysia, Brunei, and Vietnam. In November 2036, they begin an offensive, mainly targeting the Spratly Islands, a mostly uninhabited but valuable series of islands split between all the above nations. These nations know they cannot best China in naval war. By 2036, the 9-dash line is achieved by China and uncontested, winning them $2.5 trillion in minerals and giving them more influence on trade in the sea. By January 2037, Georgia too joins NATO, as it is not directly threatened by Russia or its client states. With the assimilation of the new NATO states mostly complete, NATO focuses on expansion in Central Asia starting in 2038. With Russian expansion ceding the region, and with current facilities even in retreat, Central Asia's dependence on Russia decreases as they open the western borders. The Baku-Tbilisi-Ceyhan oil pipeline grows in significance, further connecting the region to the west. By April 2039, China's assimilation of the area within the 9-dash line is largely complete. Thus, they also begin expanding into Central Asia along with Mongolia. Ethnic Chinese groups in the region welcome them. With no Russian influence in Mongolia to contend with China, the decreased need for a buffer state between the two aligning with the decrease in Russia's power, Mongolia is on its way to become a Chinese client state. As the Trump regime is at the height of its power, Trump dies of old age in February of 2040, with the whole MAGA movement basically a cult around Trump. Many in the organization are lost without him. Members contend for power, and MAGA as a group collapses. With the identity of the Republican Party formed over the last 2 decades suddenly becoming obsolete, the party is in need of a break from candidacy to rediscover itself. The splintered group is unable to unite, and elections in the legislative branch result in both the Senate and the House falling under Democratic control. The Democratic majority carefully selects a candidate they believe will responsibly reestablish the democratic process and fix the flaws which allowed its dissolution to occur. Meanwhile, other dictators fall. Both Putin and Xi Jinping die of old age in 2040 and 2042 respectively, although the organizations they led stay intact far after their deaths. Back in Washington, on the 21st anniversary of the January 6th insurrection, protesters storm the Capitol and insurgency breaks out over the country. This fighting is eventually put down by the U.S. military. It represents the final blow to a culture too focused on the past to make their own future. The U.S. mostly retreats from the international community, becoming isolationist to focus on rebuilding democracy. In their absence, NATO is lost without their leader in the inevitable Cold War against China. China, Europe, and various Asian powers rise in influence to contend with each other in the wake of America's power vacuum.
Bum 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 Iran. Bum 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 Iran. Bum 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 Iran. Went to a mosque, gonna throw some rocks. Tell the Ayatollah, gonna put you in a box.